Welcome to the Cities podcast powered by the Business Journal's Leadership Trust. Each episode on Cities looks at a particular topic, challenge, trend, or political situation through the lens of local markets. Our contributors are members of a Business Journal's Leadership Trust.
Hey everyone, this is Stephen Ganoza. This is our second episode in a series on the Inequality Dilemma, what's causing income and wealth disparity, particularly in major cities, and what can be done to bridge the gaps. Today, we have my interview with Sherilyn Adams. Sherilyn lives and works in San Francisco, where she is a member of the San Francisco Business Times Leadership Trust and the executive director of Larkin Street Youth Services, which works to help young people suffering from homelessness. Sherilyn, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be here.
So, as I understand it, the mission of Larkin Street is to end homelessness for young people.
That is correct. At the end of the day, our vision is to end youth homelessness in San Francisco.
So let's start at a macro level. What's in scope when we talk about youth homelessness?
What we know across the country is 1 out of 10 young people between the ages of 18 and 24, and 1 out of 30 young people between the ages of 13 and 18 will experience homelessness at least one night in any given year. What that translates into locally is about 1,100 young people find themselves on the streets of San Francisco on any given night. Over the course of a year, Larkin Street works with about 2,200 young people that come into our doors to get help with basic needs supports like food, shelter, clothing, restrooms, laundry. And we connect with them as we're bringing them inside to services like housing, education, employment, life skills, behavioral health, all of which we sort of operate under the umbrella of Larkin Street as a way to help young people both come inside, but also build the skills and tools they need to be able to exit homelessness. The reason young people are experiencing homelessness here and across the country is really related to either family violence in the home, parental substance abuse, or mental health issues, young people who have been unable to live in their homes or their communities because they identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered, or because of economic issues where there's simply not enough money, not enough resources in a family to be able to provide support for young people as they age. Or perhaps if they turn 18, they have to take care of themselves. And in places like San Francisco, that's really hard to do if you don't have like a college degree or you don't have the ability to get into the housing market, and that we have such a high skilled labor market here.
So to be clear, then these aren't necessarily kids who are out on the streets with their parents. These are children who kind of are already running away from something, and you're trying to prevent them now to not be victims of homelessness.
That's right. That usually we have found that there is a set of circumstances beyond the young person's control that has resulted in them being at risk for homelessness or experiencing homelessness, and they are not connected to their families or not able to stay with their families for a variety of reasons. Some young people may have also experienced family homelessness, but we are really talking about young people who are not with their families or the young people that we're working with at Larkin Street. And we are both trying to help prevent their homelessness, but if they're at risk for homelessness, or we're trying to help work with them to resolve their homelessness. We know that about 50% of adults who are chronically homeless or adults who are homeless had their first episode of homelessness before the age of 25. So the more that we can do to prevent young people from being homeless or help resolve their homelessness will go a long way towards resolving chronic homelessness in our city.
And what are some of the ways you do that? You mentioned, I think earlier, skills training for these children. I guess two parts. What efforts is Larkin Street taking to prevent the homelessness? And once somebody comes to you for help, what are you able to provide them?
Right. So on the prevention side of the house, the work we do is to really try to catch young people right when they become homeless or right before, right? So if there's ways in which we can connect with young people and they're able to stay at a place, but they need help with rent money, or they need to kick in for PG&E or for food, maybe they're able to then stay with an extended family member or another person or adult that can help them. We also, for young people under the age of 18, we have a shelter. So if folks run away and they're able to stay at the shelter, if they're and we can try to then reunite them with their family or with the child welfare system to try to resolve or to try to support or help whatever might have happened that caused them to run away, right? So that they can get the supports they need. If their families need supports, we can help connect them so that that young person can still live there. If somebody is homeless or is staying on the streets or couch surfing or making an untenable choice of having to trade sex or drugs to stay someplace, and our work is really shelter and housing, right? So getting them into, we have lots of different kinds of housing here in San Francisco to work with young people, so get them housed and then work with them to address their trauma that they've experienced, either that drove them into homelessness or trauma they experienced while being homeless. Try to work to heal that trauma with behavioral health supports and other kinds of clinical or therapeutic supports, and then also work on education, employment, the skills and tools they need to live independently, right? So how can they get a job and keep a job? Do they want to go back to college or get into college? Maybe they don't have a high school diploma or a GED. Figuring out what those are, and then we're able to provide all of those supports to young people so that they can increase their academic skills, get jobs, keep jobs, be housed with us, and then eventually be housed on their own.
I'm wondering if there's a success story you can tell. Is there a certain person that's gone through Larkin Street that's had a great outcome?
Sure, there's lots of young people that have had really great outcomes. There's a young person that was with us for a couple of years in housing. He really had an interest in public policy and advocacy, so he's now working full-time for a government relations firm. There's another young woman who came to us after riding the bus at nights and just trying to find a place to stay safe. She didn't have family in the area, and she is in college and almost ready to graduate college and living on her own. And there are, hundreds of stories like this of young people who have, used Larkin Street services for a short period of time or for a long period of time, and then now are living on their own, going to school, working in our community in the various companies that we have here. We have about over 100 young people at City College right now working on their education.
Because we want to make sure we look at this through the lens of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that this problem is sort of exacerbated by the very high costs of living in San Francisco, right? So let's take a look at that. I mean, income inequality in your city is a topic that's very well covered, right? I mean, the city kind of has a reputation for homelessness, high-paying tech jobs coming in and jacking up housing costs. Is that how you see it? Is San Francisco unique in this regard?
Well, I think what's happened in San Francisco is not unique to what's happening in many sort of urban areas that are struggling with housing and housing costs and number of booming industries, which have brought a lot of people into their cities to work in tech or to work in other places or other businesses or industries. The sort of perfect storm in San Francisco is that we've had a history in this country of reduction in support from the federal government over the past 30 or 40 years in helping to create a pipeline and supporting all different kinds of housing or affordable housing development. And then in San Francisco, we're landlocked, so it's very difficult. We have less space. It can be very difficult to build here. We have lots of rules and regulations, and so development takes a really long time. And we have lots of strongly held opinions about what kind of housing and where and how to maintain neighborhood uniqueness while trying to develop housing in our city to meet need. And we just have not kept up with the need for housing, all kinds of different housing. So it's really, really, really crunched, right? We just don't have enough housing stock by a long shot. And that is exacerbated by the high costs of housing now, the amount of folks who have been evicted or can't get back into the housing market if for some reason they lose their housing. And that is then adding to the challenges we see around homelessness. For young people, what we've seen is a reduction actually in homelessness for young people. But what has been challenging is young people who are experiencing homelessness or often have not, like I said, finished high school or have spent much time in college. So getting into the labor market, staying in the labor market, us working to find them, help them to get into jobs that will be able them to take over the rent and afford to live in San Francisco or the Bay Area, right? So as we're working with young people and they are going to school or employed, there's still a gap between what they can afford for rent, what they're getting paid at their jobs as they're attempting to sort of move into industries or move into higher paying jobs. And so that is exacerbating the homelessness situation, right? It's this perfect storm of not enough housing stock, really high cost to build, and for folks who maybe don't have a lot of experience or time in the labor market or a college degree, they can't get into the kinds of jobs that they're able to then pay the kind of rent that we have here. This also impacts our workers, right? So our workers in the nonprofit sector in San Francisco, as the sector just cannot pay our workers enough in order for them to be able to live here, to work, and then they can't live here and they're commuting from very far away. It just adds to the stress that our workers are experiencing, and that takes a toll.
Well, you touched on a lot of topics there, and I think we can go through them sort of one at a time here. You touched on sort of the public policy issues, right? The impact to culture, and then sort of how nonprofits play into the war for talent that goes on. So first off, from the public policy perspective, I guess in your view, what would really help, right? You mentioned federal funds are being cut. You mentioned that there's a lot of regulation around housing. What would you like to see, in terms of public policy to help this issue?
Well, one of the things is I'd like to see is that we need to stop saying no to housing, right? We need to be thoughtful about housing development and where we develop housing in our city, but we meaning all of us in San Francisco and all of us in the Bay Area and all of us in California really need, I think, to say yes to more housing. We can, if projects come up or opportunities come up for bonds or other things that will help fund affordable housing development, we need to say yes. We need to work and strive to have more housing, less regulations and processes. It doesn't mean a free for all, but it does mean that we need to be much more proactive and willing to say yes to housing. The other thing is we need to create a range of housing opportunities, and that's where it does take a public-private partnership. So I think when we have investments from the private industries, and we see that now, right, with Apple and Google and others really making deep investments, saying we're going to contribute billions of dollars to help create housing, and that housing is for workers and for teachers and for first responders, right? So trying to have a range of housing options, I think, is one piece. Having smarter regulations and where we can streamlining regulations that makes sense, I think, is another thing that we need to do. And we need to continue to invest in homelessness services and helping young people and others experiencing homelessness, right? We need to do, sort of all three.
Why do you think that companies like Apple are making those investments? What do they have to gain?
Well, I think there's many things to gain, right? I think one is, I think it's important that they have the opportunity to be helping to solve a problem that has been in part not created by them, but that's fair, but it has in part been exacerbated by the huge growth in an industry and in the tech companies and the numbers of workers that are coming to work for those companies. And we need to invest in housing regionally. There needs to be housing near where folks work so that we cut down on climate change, we cut down on carbon emissions, and we create an increase in housing across the ranges of different kinds of housing, right? Different cost of housing for renters or buyers. So I think they get employees that are able to, throughout, all of their employees, an opportunity to work and live closer to work, ideally. It helps increase the housing stock here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, right? They're helping to be part of the solution. And so I think that benefits them. And it creates a sense that all of us are seeking to solve the problem together and to be, again, part of the solution.
And you mentioned that, these tech companies are bringing in talent. You touched on earlier, the perfect storm, if you will, is making it challenging for the nonprofit sector to attract and retain talent, right? Being in the nonprofit sector, can you discuss how you see the impact of affordability on nonprofits?
Most nonprofits are struggling with with challenges around retaining staff and recruiting staff. So looking at turnover rates, ours is around 20-22%. 30%. Some of my sister and brother organizations are at 25, 30, 35% in terms of the amount of turnover, if not higher, that they're experiencing. We know from a staff survey that a significant percentage of our workers are working at least another part-time job. Some are working another full-time job. Many are concerned, living check to check, and concerned about if something goes wrong, they could be at risk for losing their housing. Some are experiencing homelessness or housing instability on a regular basis. And where that shows up, right, is continuity of care and continuity of relationships is critical for the success we see at Larkin Street. Young people really form strong relationships with their case managers and with the folks that they work with in education or employment, or their residential counselors that work in the programs. And those relationships are critical to our success and to the success of the young people. And so if we're losing folks because they just simply can't afford to do the work, or they're coming in from 2-hour commutes on either side, that is not tenable over time. And it makes just an incredible amount of stress for our workers. And that shows up in their health, and as well as it shows up sometimes in how they're performing. And so I think being able to have a more sustainable way to support our workers is critical if we want to continue to have a vibrant nonprofit sector here in San Francisco and the Bay Area that are really able to meet the needs of seniors and do childcare, work in homelessness, and make sure folks get food. It is really a critical safety net that nonprofits provide, and we can't do that when we're not able to pay our staff and our workers in keeping with the market.
So then what's the solution? Assuming you don't have the resources to pay compensation on par with Google, and assuming that we're not going to pass a law that like Google can only pay their developers X amount of dollars, right? How do you compete for talent?
Yeah, it's a great question. People do this work, because they're driven to it and they have a passion for it, right? So I think that doesn't pay the bills, and we need to be mindful of that. But I think I think we can work internally and work in our organization to create lots of opportunity for growth and advancement and professional training, and have sort of health and wellness programs, all the creative ways that we can provide additional perks, if you will, to staff that work here, right? So how can we support all of the things that may be meaningful to you and helpful to you? So we're trying like on-site yoga, right? There's many things that other companies can provide in addition to compensation that we haven't been able to do in the nonprofit sector. So we're trying to partner with folks who want to help us to do that, right? So a yoga teacher that wants to come on pro bono and work and provide yoga opportunities for our staff. Working really strongly on health and wellness opportunities for staff. What are ways in which we can build their skills in self-care and other kinds of things that help them with the sort of vicarious trauma that is sometimes associated with this kind of work. And then looking at other ways that we can slowly inch up and try to increase compensation, other kinds of benefits that may have a cost to them for our employees. And I think also like really thinking about how do we create housing opportunities for our workers, right? So they're eligible for affordable housing. Can we continue to think about housing opportunities for the nonprofit sector, for workers in the nonprofit sector? So how can we create that, continue to create those, or advocate on a public policy platform locally, regionally, and at the state for increased opportunities for housing?
Something else you touched on was culture, and sort of all these things kind of point to culture, preserving, allowing people to stay in the city, being close to their jobs and such. I guess why is it, and this is going to be a high level question, but why is it important to preserve the culture versus just accepting it's going to change?
San Francisco is a special place, and many of us who came to live in San Francisco, I've been here for almost 30 years now, 20 years, time flies, long time. And, I'm raising a daughter here with my partner. The culture of San Francisco is in its diversity and in the vibrancy and the sort of the fabric of the different neighborhoods, the ways in which it brings so many different ways of life together, right? Like it is important to maintain the sort of specialness of the neighborhoods. It is important to maintain, I think, a range of socioeconomic classes in the city, that we are not just the haves and the have-nots, if you will, right? I think that is critically important to the fabric, to the culture, to the spirit of the city. I think that is an important and critical element of who San Francisco is, of what San Francisco is, and who the people that choose to live in San Francisco are. And more people need to have that choice. We should not be exiting out folks because of the economics and deciding that only some people can live here, right? That is not what San Francisco is about. And I would argue that if that happens in too many places, then I think it eats away at our soul, and the trade-offs on the humanity piece of that are too great.
Right, right. And San Francisco is sort of, maybe the first city to experience a lot of these issues, I guess, along with New York and Boston, maybe. So looking back now for other cities, because other cities want to become tech hubs. You have Boise and, the Boulder, Denver area trying to attract these sorts of companies. As they seek to become like San Francisco in many ways, what lessons should they take from the experience of the Bay Area?
As much as you're planning for like where your business is going to be or where the building's going to be and what that's going to look like, you also need to be thinking about what impact your footprint, unintended and intended, and what can you do to mitigate any of the damages that might happen or could potentially happen in that community. So housing is going to be an issue. Get ahead of it. It takes time to build housing. So you decide 5 years after, like, shit, we should have developed some housing. That needs to be part of the plan ahead of time. If transit is an issue, deal with that ahead of time. Make sure that your impact is not having a disproportionate impact on the most marginalized in any of those communities. So don't just think about like who's going to work at my place, but like think about who am I impacting by coming in here? Whose neighborhoods, whose communities? Like we have a long history in this country of not paying attention to that. The people that have paid the price for that are people of color and poor people. So that can't happen. So think about that first, not last. Who am I impacting? How do I know what I'm doing and plan? How can I mitigate any of those negative impacts on those that have the least opportunity to respond to a forced change because I've entered? What can plan? Learn, plan. Know that you will have an impact, and then how do you mitigate that and raise up the positive impact?
Right. Sort of these unintended consequences are out there now. It's just being proactive as other cities try to catch up to San Fran. Okay, I want to bring it full circle before we close. Back to Larkin Street. What excites you most about the work you're doing?
The young people. Right now I'm super excited about the fact that I do believe we can get to a place in the city where we can reduce youth homelessness by 50% by 2023, sort of on a path to ending homelessness for young people, to having a system in place where, of course, young people will be at risk for homeless and might become homeless, but we will have a system in place to be able to respond to that quickly, making sure that we get folks before they are on the streets for long, that we have the right amount of resources, and then when young people exit homeless services and are on their own, they will not become homeless again. So I'm very excited that we have a chance to do that, and that we don't have to live in a world that young people are sleeping on our streets. It is possible for that to be different. So I'm excited every day by that vision, and I am emboldened in that vision by knowing who the young people are that we work with, and knowing the capacity of the staff and of the young people to really make that happen along with other folks in the city. So I'm excited, right? We have lots of great, incredible people that support our work. We have amazing young people, and we have a chance to eventually end youth homelessness.
By 50% in just, 4 years. It's
a bold goal.
It's a bold goal. Well,
but we're bold. That's what the question is. Be bold.
All right. Well, that's a great note to close on. Sherilyn, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having an opportunity to talk about these important issues. Really appreciate it.
Great. Sherilyn Adams, the Executive Director of Larkin Street Youth Services. You can find out more about the work they're doing at larkinstreetyouth.org. All right. Thank you again, Sherilyn.
Thank you. Take care.
And if you missed the first episode in our series on the Inequality Dilemma,
although we all talk much more often now about pay equity, and we are so excited to see the focus that legislators are having on that issue in some places, if we solved the pay equity issue tomorrow, it wouldn't come close to solving the wealth issue.
check out our episode with Kelly Griesmer of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, where we discuss the issue of wealth in women and the work that Kelly is doing in Columbus and the Central Ohio area.
This has been the Cities Podcast, powered by the Business Journal's Leadership Trust. Please be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're a member of Business Journal's Leadership Trust and would like to participate in our podcast series, please email your member concierge. If you're interested in joining a Business Journal's Leadership Trust, learn more at trust.bizjournals.com.